The Devil's Arithmetic, Chapter 13. Hannah woke to a strange mechanical bellowing. For a moment she thought it was the clock radio by her bed. She sat up suddenly and hit her head with a loud crack on the shelf above her. Stunned, she looked around. Clock radio? The words set lumpily in her mind. She was not sure what a clock radio was. Besides, her head hurt where she banged it and her back ached from lying on the hard shelf. Even her leg hurt. She drew her knee up to look. There was caked blood and a big scab along her shin. Then she remembered. The trip in the cattle car, the long hungry days, the heat and the cold, the smell, the dead baby, the tattoo, the shorn hair. Cautiously she reached up and felt her head. What hair was left was a stubble. She did not dare look at the number on her arm. Swinging her legs carefully over the side of the shelf, she eased herself onto the floor, aware that the bellowing horn had stopped. Others in the barracks were performing the same slow unfolding. She looked around, her eyes and mind still fuzzed with sleep. The door to the barracks was flung open, and a guard stuck his head in. "You want food? Get in line. Now, schnell. You must eat. Hungry Jews are dead Jews. Dead Jews do not work." Food, Hannah whispered to herself, and the dream she'd had came back to her. All that Seder food and the familiar faces around the table, faces she could almost, but not quite, name. She imagined the taste of the roast beef and saliva filled her mouth. Standing, she smoothed down the wrinkled skirt of her dress and looked around for Gittel. Gittel was bending over one of the lowest shelves. Hannah recognized her by the awful red print dress. Hurrying over, Hannah called out, "Food, Gittel. They'll give us food if we hurry, at last." Gittel stood up slowly and stared past Hannah to the door as if she did not see her. Her mouth whispered something, but no sound came out, and her hands clenched and unclenched into fists. Something forced Hannah to bend down and stare into the shelf. Little Zipporah lay curled in a ball, her finger in her mouth like a stopper in a bottle. There was a fly on her cheek. Hannah reached out to brush it off. "Do not touch her," Beetle said. But Hannah's hand hovered over the child's cheek and the fly that would not leave. "I said, do not touch her." Beetle's voice was strangely hoarse. Hannah still reached toward the fly, unbelieving, and Gittel grabbed her hand, spinning her around. She slapped Hannah's face twice. "Do not slap. Touch her. Slap." Then, as suddenly, she put her arms around Hannah with such force, Hannah gasped. Gittel buried her face against Hannah's shoulder, sobbing. "Ishak, what will I say? Zipporah, he must be told. What can I? Monsters." It was all Hannah could do to free her arms enough so that she could pat Gittel's shorn head, touching it with as much tenderness as she could muster, while her cheeks still burned from the unwarranted slaps. They were the last ones out of the barracks. Even Fega had managed to get onto the proper food line before them, with the help of one of the women from her village. Emerging from the building, blinking into the noon sun, Hannah saw that Gittel's eyes were dry, but they still held a reserve of some awful, unspoken anger. The line moved quickly, silently. At the first table, a girl handed them each a metal bowl. Plain-faced, with a broad forehead and deep-set brown eyes, she greeted them with a smile as if they were old friends. Hannah guessed she couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Yet her face seemed ageless. "You must take good care of your bowl," the girl said to them. It was obvious she had recited these same words to each group of newcomers, yet her voice held a sweetness and a patience quite out of keeping with the information she delivered. "I call them every bowls because they are everything to us. Without the bowl, you cannot have food, you cannot wash, you cannot drink. Memorize your bowl, its dense, its shape, Always know where you have put it. There are no replacements. She winked at Hannah. That is the official speech. My mother, may she rest in peace, used to give it, and now I take her place. If you meet me tonight after supper, I will tell you the rest. And if you cannot find me, ask anyone for Rivka. Rivka. Too exhausted to react, Hannah nodded and held up her bowl for its dipper full of watery potato soup. At the next table she was given a small slab of dark bread. She began to eat even before she left the line. She was too hungry to eat slowly, and the soup and bread were gone before she had time to look around. After the meal, the Zuganji were lined up again in what seemed to Hannah to be a totally arbitrary order, orchestrated by the same three-fingered woman. She dealt out slaps and pushes with such fervor that they all did her bidding without protest. Hannah managed to dodge a slap. The slap meant for her hit Shifra, who cried out in pain and was hit again for the noise. Hannah bent her shoulders over against Shifra's muffled sobbing, guilty because she had been the cause of it, relieved because the blow had not fallen upon her. When they were lined up to the woman's satisfaction, she nodded abruptly and walked to the front to address them. You wonder what to expect from now on? She asked. I will tell you what to expect. Hard work, that is what. Hard work and more hard work. And punishment if you do not perform well and on time, without complaints. Her speech was short enough that Hannah took a deep breath in relief. She was just starting to relax when a man in a dark uniform, jangling with medals, walked over to the woman. The woman bowed her head and then looked up at the gathering of prisoners, smiling an awful warning. Standing for a long moment, hands behind his back, the officer silently surveyed them. Hannah felt as if he were looking deep inside her, toting up her abilities, guessing at her chances. Someone else, she knew, stood that way. Mr. Unsword. She had the name and could almost see him in her mind's eye, but she couldn't remember who he was, only that he was someone who stood up in front of a group and shook his head just like that. She wondered if she could smile at the officer and whether it might help. Sometimes it worked in school with Mr. Unsword. In school. There, she had it, an elusive slip of memory. Then, as quickly as it faded, replaced by another, much more vivid memory. Little Zipporah, lying still on the low shelf, her finger corked so finally in her mouth. That image stopped any chance of a smile. The officer cleared his throat. You will have discipline, he said suddenly, without preamble. You will work hard. You will never answer back, complain, or question. You will not try to escape. You will do this for the fatherland. You will do it, or you will die. The officer turned smartly on his heel and left. Then the three-fingered woman came forward to tell them about the work that lay ahead and what they were to expect each day. Above them a quartet of swallows dipped and circled, twittering madly as they plunged after insects. There was a drone of machinery somewhere off to the right. In the distance, beyond another long row of barracks, Hannah could see a single strand of smoke rising against the bright spring sky, curling endlessly out of a tall chimney stack. Once again it occurred to her that there was something she was not remembering, something terribly important to her, to all of them. She wondered if Keto would know what it was, and resolved to ask her. But the raucous swallows, the woman's droning commands, the ground bass of the machinery mesmerized her. She could feel her eyelids starting to close. To stop herself from falling asleep on her feet, she threw her head back suddenly and took a deep breath. Out of the corner of her eye she glimpsed Gittel. Then, without moving her head farther, only her eyes, she managed to find Fega. She was standing halfway down the line. Her face, paper white, and her eyes fully closed. She swayed where she stood. Behind her was Esther, and beside Esther was Shiphrah, her lashless eyes even stranger looking under the shaved head. Hannah remembered them, remembered each and everything they had said to her in the forest. She remembered the forest, and remembered she had told them stories. But the stories, though she could not remember, and it bothered her that she could not. She'd seen men running to get into a line behind them during the first moments of the assembly, but she hadn't dared turn around then. Even now she was afraid to look. Would Shmuel be there? Ishchak? Would Rabbi Baruch, the Badjan? The members of the klezmer band? Would Mr. Unsword? Gittel, she whispered out of the side of her mouth, low enough so that the woman in blue couldn't hear her. Gittel! Gittel touched her hand. Kaya, she whispered back, so fiercely. It sounded like a promise or a command.